I'm really excited to be able to celebrate ACPA at 100, returning to the city where ACPA was founded in 1924. The first ACPA president, May Cheney, so following in her footsteps 100 years later is making me feel all kinds of excitement and enthusiasm for where we are headed. Some of the things that ACPA has done well in the past 100 years really include providing space and voice for people of minoritized identities. So we were the first association to bring together student affairs educators of color and LGBTQI2S+ educators. You know, when I think about, though, the traditions of the governing board, I think there's a view of collective wisdom and kind of continuing the legacy of those leaders who have come before us, and then taking our responsibility and our engagement with leadership in ACPA to the next level. So the SIRJD, or the Strategic Imperative, I think is one of the documents that moving forward into the next 100 years, ACPA will be known as having taken an early principled stance around what we can do in our roles and within our sphere of influence to really address some of the larger structural inequities that exist in society.
Women started ACPA and understanding that, 100 years ago, women starting something, they were paving a way. Like, they were really creating something that we probably would never know that it would be what it is today. For me as a Black woman to come into this space and to see that it has been 100 years of this association, and we have seen the change and the growth and really the development, but also the ways to stick to what we want to do, like racial justice, decolonization, and that is what we want to do, and that's what we're going to do, and that is who we are. We're not asking people to pick us, we're asking people to be alongside us. And I think 100 years tells us that not only have we grown and we have learned, but we have something to remember.
Its legacy of being the space for the folks who are working in the most entry-level roles in higher education and giving them an opportunity to expand their horizons and develop professionally. That thread has been woven through ACPA over the course of the past 100 years. And that is why there's so much energy when you arrive at a convention location. That enthusiasm, that sense of opportunity as folks are entering the field.
I decided as a researcher, I needed to figure out how to do research and connect my love of ACPA. So I really dug into the then Standing Committee, now Coalition's origin story to try to figure out what happened, how did it happen, and just learn about that, because I had received so much from ACPA. I think there are a lot of challenges that we face on a regular basis on college campuses, and I think the field of student affairs is actually the front lines, in front of the scenes, behind the scenes, making things move. It's such a powerful organization, and the roles, all the things that we do, whether it's at minority serving institutions, whether it's HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, Hispanic serving institutions, tribal colleges, whether it's Research Ones, whether it's regional institutions, we're all doing the work of the association every day. And I feel like this is a field that gets so burnt out because of our labor regularly, because of the challenges to the field about, and the critiques about this field, about what should or shouldn't be included. And if we don't, as a field, stand up to that, I think that to me, that's very scary. And part of the power of ACPA is to collaborate together and really push forward on the field to make sure the field is really making a difference in the way that we say that it should. When we're talking about really pushing back on systemic oppression and overturning, disrupting systemic oppression, that's a part of the work, whether you're sitting behind closed doors talking about your budget or whether you're in an organization in front of the entire association.
connection and coming back together to celebrate just all the history ACPA has done for not only higher ed, but I think for the world. If we have members that go outside of higher ed, they bring that knowledge and they bring that passion to other fields, and so we're really celebrating the reach that we have.
I think in 1961, pardon me, was the first organizing of 12 commissions, and at the time they also were numbered. And I mean, even that I think is knowledge lost because of how many commissions have been organized, because people come to convention and get this energy and context of shared interest and say, I want to organize around what the online engagement experience is for student support, right? That is incredibly important. And I think what keeps ACPA's leadership and membership so sustainable is that we're willing to bring multiple points of view across functional areas into play. So commissions are excellent because everyone's coming with some sort of work or graduate lens for higher education. So it's a very clear pathway to get involved in a little bit more of a deliberate way.
I believe and have seen across my career within the association that ACPA tackles issues that oftentimes that campuses aren't going to tackle for maybe 5 years, right? And so we're always kind of ahead of the curve, particularly when it comes to equity and inclusion, of thinking about issues or having issues brought up that we need to untangle. And so ACPA to me is a role model of where higher education should be. In all of its messiness, and we do have a lot of messiness too, but I think the aspirational nature of trying to boldly transform, to really think about what is right, to create more voice and more space at the table and across the room are really some of the things that ACPA has meant to me. And the ability to lead in a space like ACPA that allows you so much more breadth and depth of understanding our work has been very empowering to me. To be able to really think about how we go about change, how we go about inclusion, how we go about justice, and how to create the confidence to do what's right even though we work in systems that are broken or messed up or just a world that's complicated. Sometimes I think on our campuses we feel like we're the only people who are experiencing this, and so coming into spaces like ACPA and talking about issues and being able to talk about issues that are facing campuses with people at the time, particularly for me, that were vice presidents or folks that I wouldn't necessarily be able to engage with on my campus in a way that I felt like really validated my experience and my voice was really impactful for me.
There's a lot of professional associations out there that are functional area focused, whereas with ACPA, we have those commissions, those entity groups that allows those different functional areas to collaborate and have those voices being heard. I think that is something that I hope ACPA will continue doing moving forward, because I think this is a space where oftentimes we hear higher ed is really siloed in different functional areas, but I see ACPA being able to bring all those functional areas together, and how can we encourage more collaboration and knowledge sharing.
So I really appreciate the way we center research and scholarship as critical to the way we think about practice, and really centering that there has to be a didactic relationship between both of them. And I really appreciate the people who dedicate, their labor to really offering critical frameworks or critical praxis thoughts into the way that we can shape environments. So I think that's one. I think too, ACPA has done a really great job of thinking about how the word community is a living word, and more importantly has to be defined by people in community with themselves. And so I appreciate the ways that even as we think about entity groups within an association, that they have the power to think about language and what that means for them and their community in that time, place, space, and manner, right? And so the evolution of how people claim that this is what this community means for us at that time. And then third, I think just the quality of events and programs. And so, one of the things I appreciate about my trajectory that ACPA has done well is they've provided opportunities for me to not simply just have an experience, but to have an experience that's going to resonate with the community that keeps going within the association. So ACPA has the mid-level institute for us as an association, and thinking about it's not simply just going to get knowledge and skills or abilities to be a better mid-level manager. It's about what does it mean to be part of a community that identifies as a mid-level professional, and how are we actually going to support each other in this work, because the day is complicated, the work is long, and it's ongoing, and so it can't just be about the skills, it has to be about the community.
So I think one of the strengths that ACPA has had throughout its first 100 years has been always focusing on the student as a whole. So whether it was talking about it in terms of student development or student learning or student identities, we have always understood that students are complex beings and multifaceted beings operating in complex and multifaceted systems, and that we see their totality and we recognize it and we lift it up and we value and respect all of that. And how we've understood that and what it's focused on has shifted over the 100 years as the lenses through which we look at the world have shifted, but that has never changed. And nor has our commitment to inclusion. And again, we've used different words over time, but we have always, as an association, been focused on broadening the table and bringing people and their whole selves to that table and being part of the work that we're doing. And I love to imagine the ways in which we will continue to be leaders in transforming higher education and students and lives and our world into the next 100 years.
ACPA has also been very committed to the diversity and equity inclusion, and they don't just say that as buzzwords, but they actually live out that value. Seeing how all gender bathrooms are represented at convention, to the bias response protocols, the strategic imperative, and really pushing entity groups and commissions and coalitions to really think about how do we infuse that in everything that we're doing, right? I think that's very telling of an organization, that they want to make sure that they are not only a hub for student affairs practitioners, but it's one in which people can be themselves and be their authentic selves when they come to convention.
For me, I was at a campus where a lot of people were calling themselves social justice educators, and they weren't troubling the words or stepping back to think about the access of the knowledge that they had been imparted with through their graduate programs and trainings, and that was really creating exclusion around the people that need that support and those resources for conversations about what social justice is. So raised my hand to be a part of an entity group around social justice because I wanted those tools, and I also wanted to challenge those privileged constructs that come to bear when you're at an organization or at an experience like ACPA's convention, where you find your people and it's like the one time of year that you think you actually are understood and convinced. You have to wrestle with that tension of both finding that therapy of sorts with your people and thinking about who's not in the room and creating space for access so that we can grow our membership and deeply engage our membership in ways that we need to keep thinking about with what technology is going to look like over the next 100 years, and how that plays into giving the most meaningful connections in person that you can't replicate all the magic of.
Because this association has given so much to me, I am so grateful for the opportunity to give back and serve as the president. The other thing I'd say is that I really believe in the difficult work that we're doing around racial justice and decolonization, and continuing that process and projects from previous presidents, right? So each new leader who comes in has an opportunity to kind of champion different ideas and thoughts and move the association forward. And I think collectively, together with the governing board and our other incoming leaders, we can really make a really specific mark upon higher and tertiary education in racial justice and decolonization strategies.
When I reflect on what choices I can make now to impact the next 100 years of higher education, I think about being the best educator that I can be, because I think about the legacy and the impact that I will have on students and the profession, and for those individuals that I do interact with and impact, how they will also pay it forward. So I think about it more so as an investment. How can I be my best self to leave a legacy with other individuals that they carry on the principles of equity, inclusion, inquiry, and wanting to do the right thing even when it's tough. And if I can be that example, I can only hope that is put forward and paid forward.
For the prior 100 years, ACPA has been on the forefront when it comes to decolonization and also inclusivity and the DEI work. You can tell that through our way we have our diverse governing board and also the way we have structured our coalitions and also our networks. And that is where I think the heart and soul of ACPA lies, which is in our strategic imperative for the decolonization of work within DEI work. And I think that is very proud. I'm very proud of that. I have no organization I've seen that has done that. And I think that that's going to be leading us into the next 100 years that we have going forward.
It's the ability to talk about different topics surrounding racial justice, social justice, and decolonization within the broad realm of international education that has been the most fulfilling for me. So I remember last year we did a series where we talked about intersectionality within international education. So we explored some of those topics. What do they mean? We explored the different intersecting, compounding ways of oppression that impacts international students, whether that's other parts of their identities or where they're at. So be able to do that type of work kind of bridges two of my favorite worlds together.
The idea that ACPA is trying to make careers better for the people in the field really speaks to me, and I want every identity, every race, religion, background, anything to have an equitable place at the table and make people feel like their work is being valued and that they're doing something that will fulfill them and equally being compensated for that. So for me, ACPA pushing for all of those things really speaks to me, and that is why ACPA means a lot to me and why I want to be a part of that mission for pushing for those equities that we need so desperately, both in our society and also in higher education.
ACPA, what does it do well? It connects people. It serves, I think, master's students really well, probably better, and has over the years. It has served faculty really well. Obviously, this has been my home for 50 years. In terms of where it's going to go, I think that in order for ACPA to be successful, it needs to be more inclusive of the context of higher ed and not just in terms of student affairs. I think for ACPA to be sustainable, it really needs to connect more with people who are in all parts of the institution, because I think that we are showing that we are a field, that we have a body of knowledge that's important, but we need to put that body of knowledge within the context of student affairs, within higher education, and we need to make sure that we do that over the next 100 years in order to continue to be sustainable.
I think something we can do to continue impacting higher education over the next 100 years is to, one, keep students at the forefront of our work. I think ACPA has done that very well over the previous 100 years, but that's critical to making sure that the change we're implementing actually impacts students. I think another thing we can do is stay involved with our professional associations, particularly with ACPA. We've always been very good at thinking differently, being critical of our practice, and actually doing the work to figure out what works in higher education. I think over the next 100 years, that's going to continue to be really important for us.
I think in the first 100 years, ACPA has done two things really well. It has centered the needs of professionals and always kept the identities of professionals that we bring to work every day at the center of its mission so that we can show up to do our best work for students on our campuses. And then it centered the work of students. primarily through the research and the professional development that the association honors. Those have been leading hallmarks of this association for the first 100 years, and I'm absolutely certain they'll be hallmarks of the association for 100 more.
It's almost hard to understand, conceptualize, think about, even dream what higher education will look like in 100 years. Because 100 years ago, someone like me probably is not here talking to anybody like you. And so my hope is that more people like me, more students, faculty, staff are accomplishing great work, creating new knowledge, creating cutting-edge, innovative practices, and is doing the work of educating future generations to lead the world.
And 100 years is a long time, but some of the choices I believe that we need to be making now that I can do in my everyday life as a practitioner in student affairs is showing up for my students and learning and building intentional relationships and getting to know what they need to succeed every day on the college campus, because I want every student to have an opportunity in the next 100 years to discover and become the authors of their own lives through Baxter McGold's self-authorship theory is one of my favorites to talk about, and I believe that as a group of ACPA, we can work together to provide that to our students and ultimately have a place where people feel welcome, included, and that they feel like they belong wherever they are choosing to attend university.
I feel like in the next 100 years, higher education will look obviously very different than how it is now. I think technology will be a huge part of higher education within how we use systems. I think that also higher education will really be a access point and give a voice to a lot more people than it has been in the past, especially for our adult students, for our graduate students, for our entry-level professionals. I think that we will have to really look at how we cultivate that leadership within that and giving them more opportunities for access. I use the word access intentionally because I think we do need to, in the next 100 years, open up more ways for our students of different identities and races and international students as well. How do we create those opportunities to break barriers so that they can access our higher ed institutions? And so I think in the next 100 years, we'll make a lot of progress in that.
So I think I'm being intentionally when I encounter a new member of the commission or someone is outreaching to me about getting into the field. I'm there to be transparent with them and offer them all the information, give them all the details to help them to make their decision. I think with that, I can see it's definitely will influence the future of higher ed because people would know what they are getting into and they will be prepared to be successful in the field.
Well, I think higher education, looking forward to the next 100 years, is going to go through some pretty radical changes. It'll be the most diverse student population ever. I think education will be delivered in lots of different modalities, and the structures are going to be a lot more flexible, I think. I think even work in higher education is going to be more flexible. All of us now are really looking at flexible work design, and really trying to think differently about how to make higher education, not just a meaningful career in terms of purpose, but also in terms of life balance and making it a place where, people want to be and want to spend a career in a lifetime.
Well, I'm seeing so many changes in terms of the students that we serve, how they think, how they behave, and what they believe they should get from higher education is going to be different. They are more vocal, they know what they want, and it's also going to be dependent on what the society will look like, because I have seen changes in terms of the students that come to the institution based on changes that happen within the society. It will be more fluid. I don't think it would be more like online, it would be more creative, because I think younger generations are becoming even more creative than we are, and they demand more from the persons who would be lecturers, the persons who would be administrative staff. So a lot of paradigm shift is what's going to happen.
Our commitment in our passion to move forward. I think we think big, we have a lot of ideas, we are not afraid to be critical of the world, of our profession, but our commitment to make it better, I think, is what has gotten us so far. And so hopefully within this next 100 years, we still continue to be critical, but also moving forward and in that.
You know, the governing board is traditionally a space of consensus. It's a place where people come together and we ultimately arrive maybe at the same place, but the process by which we get there sometimes involves like people having different ideas about the way we do that. And I think providing space and voice for everyone to be a part of that process is really important. So it's an inclusive space as well.
How does ACPA encourage young professionals and seasoned professionals to think about the wider ranging, larger impact that their decisions have, just not on the current situation, but down the road? And I think sometimes we, as professionals, we want a quick fix to solve the problem. If you're in a residence hall so you can sleep that night, but versus what are the issues that you may fix them today, but they may cause a greater problem down the road.
So what I did was I went to the archives in Bowling Green and I connected with the librarian, and the librarian pushed up this huge, just wheeling cart with all this information, and there were files and pictures and photos and newsletters and everything. And I learned about the START. So the origin of the then task force for women was in 1970. And it was the president of ACPA at the time worked with Elizabeth Greenleaf and asked her to chair the task force on women. And she did, she started it, and there was a lot of critique. I did interviews with the women who started the group, and a lot of the women talked about how scary it was to be a part of an all-women's group, that there was such critique, that the men were, why do you have to have an association? Why do you have to have a group? You're a part of ACPA. You don't need your own group. And in fact, if you're all together, you must all be lesbians. And that at the time was not as cool as it is now, but it was absolutely a critique, right? That you can't all come together as women. And some were queer, some weren't, you know, it just was a part of women being together. And so just understanding and unlocking some of that fear that the women had at the time was really, I think, interesting and haunting in a way. And so the women just really worked with the association to then end up becoming the Standing Committee for Women in 1973 or 4 that year. They worked hard to do that, and then later became the Coalition on Women's Identities to be inclusive, gender inclusive. I know this group of ACPA is fighting on a daily basis to make sure that we are living what we purport, and I feel like this is the group that it really makes a difference in people's lives. It makes a difference in the lives of students, in the next generation coming up, and yeah.
For me, ACPA is the living kind of definition and the representation of what community could be. It's an invitation to say, here's what we think, and here's our values, and here's our truth. But then more importantly, what does it mean to be in relationship with people who stand on that? I think it's an offer and an invitation to say, here's what is, but what isn't. And more importantly, how can we exist necessarily in a world that doesn't always agree with our existence? I appreciate the ways that ACPA allows us to say, we are going to center this as truth, or as an important truth. And more importantly, we are here to advocate and engage and activate around that truth. Recognizing that we get it, not everyone may be in this lane, but this is our lane. And if that's your lane, come on. And I just really simply enjoy that.
I think ACPA isn't interested in allowing higher education to be a place that is exclusionary, and really wants it to be a welcoming space for people, and we want to disrupt that narrative. And I don't see another group, another similar like organization doing that in the way that as steadfast as we do it, and especially being committed to doing it in a way that is not rushed and doing it right, because I think that is super important.
For my commission, global dimension of student development, I think the main purpose we have are 3 different areas. First, we are talking about how to better support international students, and secondly, we are talking about how to better support actually students who wants to study abroad. And lastly, it's also a commission that we actually have international faculty and international student affairs professionals all coming together supporting each other. That's actually really important for me, having that community that actually we are talking to each other no matter about job searching, or it's actually finding that work-life balance, or actually talking about work visa, because immigration policies in the US is very different. It's just a bonding experience, and we talk about the traumas we face, and we celebrate the achievements we each have, because there are so many international students want to get into the higher education field, and there's so many things they were not told, probably not during a graduate program, because immigration policies, work visa, it's not something have been discussed that often, or to be honest, even salary, it's now being 100% transparent.
What can we unlearn? I think that question isn't asked enough, because someone says something quickly or confidently and we take it as gospel, and ultimately this is, I think, one of the most poetic spaces for our membership to step back and say, are these things that we could unlearn? Because are there colonized constructs at play? Is there racial injustice that was oriented in how those decisions were made or how we act? So really being honest with ourselves about the space to unlearn things that might help us feel a little lighter and a little healthier with the important work that we do.
Like when I started as an undergrad, we didn't even have cell phones. We barely had email, right? In 1994, there was, I don't know, I hope we see that we each are valuable parts of the institution, and that we all are here to really serve our students. I mean, that's a hard question. I don't even know. I would love to see like classrooms shift, and you know, like, do we need grades? Like, I mean, and that's so controversial, but like, are you learning, right? Like, are you learning in these spaces? Or are we just like opening our students' heads, pouring in the information, shaking it, and being like, go, right? Like, are we really conveying those messages? And I would hope that in 100 years, we are not having some of the same fights we are right now.
You know, I don't know that I can fully fathom in 100 years how higher education will show up, but I think one thing that this association leads us through is knowing that there is a lot of unknown there, and knowing that we are right now in a time of reckoning in higher education, and knowing in so many aspects the environments that we know, the structures that we know as higher education are not sustainable for our students, for our staff, for our faculty, for infrastructure and finances, and all of these ways.
What I'm hoping for is there would be greater possibility for dreaming. There's greater access. So we have, and what I mean by access is that there's a greater commitment from the states financially, that it's more affordable, that there isn't such a pressure to focus on skill and business, that when we do research, it's not always about the bottom line, that people can actually learn and dream and hope through their education.
The other thing I take comfort in, though, is being part of an association that's not looking at solving the problems of higher education today. It is, by its mission and vision, boldly transforming the vision for the future of higher education. And I stay connected here in this association because I see through our leaders, I see through our elected officers and governing board members, this passion for how our research and our practice and our scholarship is informing us not to be ready for today, but for embracing that higher education of 10, 20, 50, 100 years from now.
I think we just need to continue to grow. Like, you know, I've been a part of it for 20 years, which is not 100. But I think the growing pains, you know, like we just need to continue to work through things. We need to evolve, and I think evolution is sometimes really painful and hard. I hope justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, we are still a thing. Or maybe we're not because it's infused into everything, right? Like I always say, the best thing is that you no longer need me. Maybe in 100 years, you won't need positions like mine because it's just natural and it's infused everywhere.
And I feel like we've lost some of the desire or ability to really talk about becoming the human you're going to become in college, which is really why I chose to go into this work. And so I hope that in the next 100 years, we're able to ground that and we're able to really challenge the systems that have existed that create a lot of barriers and make things tense. And really flip the script on who and what college is for and how people are cared about in those spaces. And that would be students and staff. I think we're really struggling with the rising costs in higher education, but also how we pay people to do that work and value the work that they're doing. That's really heavy, and particularly right now, very heavy in terms of mental health and developmentally where people have been. And I think there's just a lot of fear in our country and in the world about interacting with others and kind of digging deeper. And so how do we, I think we all choose, I think many of us choose this profession because we believe in the power of education or of the undergraduate or graduate experience, or to whatever extent that is. And so how do we meld that into the development that folks really need and be taken care of as part of that process too, so that we can do even better work to help support those folks while doing something that I think we're also very privileged to be able to do.
When I think about the next 100 years, the future of higher ed feels like a couple of things. One, it's going to be about how do we embrace the gray. I think higher ed is going to be the place and space where multiple truths coexist. And while yes, federal regulation and public policy may want us to be this, the lived experience of truth is going to be that. And how do we reconcile and operate in a space where we're trying to appease both people? And you have to want to do that work. And I think that is the future of how do we build people in a place and space to say, not only are you prepared to do both, like you got a community who will wrap around you to do both as well. Second, I think about the future of higher ed really centering how are we choosing to say that community well-being matters? And that we see ourselves as part of the larger ecosystems of the communities we actually operate. So sure, higher education has done work around what does it mean to be in a community-engaged institution with their local cities, towns, community agencies, yada, yada, yada. But what does it mean to really center ourselves as part of a critical ecosystem to how state and local government sees their functioning, and seeing our resources, both human and organizationally, as critical to the success of cities and towns. How are we choosing to say that we are an integral part of where we go, and what is the future we want to create? And then finally, I think a lot about how we, in terms of the future of higher education, how we are choosing to get more blended in the way that we think about our work. So I think about the vice presidency for student affairs. So yes, I don't think the position itself will change from strategy, organizational leadership and development and the such, right? But I do think about the vice presidency role as what does it mean to systematically and critically reflect and engage on the wholeness of our portfolio. I think the future, so gone are the ways that you can't just depend on that, like your trajectory in student life prepared you, is how do we sit in the fullness of student success, community well-being, and student life engagement to really be situated in a way to prepare you to think about the full portfolio that this position will commend. And that means that we have to prepare people to become not simply just generalists and not have these experiences, but deep appreciation and knowledge about how all of this works together in a cohesive ecosystem. That's critical, and that's where we should be.
If you ask me, what do I think higher ed will look like in the next 100 years, I would have to be a genie in a bottle to, I don't know, it scares me. Because I think it's got to be more inclusive. To get us out of some of the challenges and problems we've created for ourselves and what the world is facing, it's got to be more inclusive. And yes, there's disciplines and content you need to learn, but I'm fearful that if higher ed isn't concerned about how people interact with each other in person, not just a quick text, a TikTok. I mean, TikTok has been consuming the airwaves for the last 3 weeks, whether it's, who's manipulating it, but how do we get back to interacting, and how does higher ed assist in this, interacting in sincere, authentic, inclusive ways with people in the same room or even on the same Zoom?
Higher education or field is going through a rough patch for sure, right? There's hostility around the work that we do. There's a lot of questions about, pushback about the work that we do. And I think that one, just remaining persistent, but also centering our students and our staff, faculty, all of that, because these are the people that are doing those great work. And if we don't center that care or provide the support, and I think that's come from me, from the association, from the the groups that you're part of within ACPA, I think if we don't center the people, we're gonna lose it.
I think, hopefully, the optimist in me thinks that we will continue to push for the things that our field needs. We will continue to push for more equitable workplaces. We will continue to push for political changes that will allow people to be their authentic selves in different environments and in any environment. And I think we're going to start to see new learners on campus. I think we're going to move closer and closer to that idea of traditional student, whatever that means to you, kind of dissolving, and anyone on a college campus can be seen as a student.
I hope that higher education will be more collaborative. That's what I hope, and I hope that it will feel like that too. I hope that higher education will make a way to really want to collaborate with corporate and really integrate technology and the things that we do and the spaces that we're at and the things that we want to do within higher education, like whether that is growing student success, whether that is growing our equity lens, whether that is growing the ways that we influence technology in our classroom space and our programming space and things like that.
I think for me, I think our issue is going to be accessibility. How do we ensure that higher ed is accessible to all of the different communities in the United States and internationally? And so I think that's going to be critical for us to think about how do we talk about that value that higher education has in our communities and what's that return on investment? Because we're at a time where people are questioning the value of higher education, the importance of degrees, what are students learning in the classroom. So I think that higher ed needs to be thinking about what are the topics that are being discussed, how do we prepare students for why they need and what's the value of higher education. So I think that's going to be critical for us, because if we can't articulate that value, then we're not going to be here. And so I think that's critical for us to think strategically about that.
What ACPA has done well is involved the next generation of leaders, and they should continue to do that as they prepare for the next 100 years, and creating opportunities for leadership to engage across generationally and to be involved and to be interactive and to learn from each other has been one of the hallmarks of ACPA's work. And so that way we stay with the wisdom of those who've been in the work longer and the cutting edge wisdom of those who are coming behind us.
when I think about the next 100 years of higher education, I see ACPA as central in that opportunity for us to kind of think about what does higher ed adjacent, what does the larger field of education and those organizations and consultant groups and other types of work like do to support people who work with college students on our campuses. And so I'm just really excited about where that could all go. And in my role over the next little bit of time, the next little snapshot in which I get to be the ACPA president, I'm really going to be thinking about what are the things that we need to do sustainability-wise to create the type of field as well as institutional supports that keep people in higher ed or higher ed adjacent roles for their career, right? It might be really tempting to want to leave student affairs for positions that don't require quite as much of your heart. And I really want, as a part of our future trajectory, to build that love and capacity within the association for the next 100 years of ACPA.
The world is in difficult times now. It has been for the last 100 years. It probably will still be great significant challenges in 100 years from now. And hopefully ACPA and our field is providing an educational experience and providing the knowledge that future leaders need to help us as a society, both in the United States and beyond, to address, meet, succeed, solve some of our most pressing challenges.
My hope is that, the higher education continues to be a space of transformation, continues to be a space where people feel valued, belonging, find themselves as emerging adults and can figure out how they're going to leverage their college degrees to be successful. And what that looks like is so individual, and the pathway and journey to that looks so different. But you hope that that's a space for them, for students, for faculty and staff to kind of really embrace the spirit of education and what's that, about even in all its contested identities and, power, privilege, white supremacy, decolonizing the work, racial justice, like all of these really important lived life experiences, but for education to be the place that's transformative and allows people to learn and grow and reflect.
I am so excited about ACPA celebrating 100 years. I think a part of it is this notion that there's been a lot of narratives about ACPA, and so this notion that our association is 100 years strong and has been really, I think, changing things in each context, right, in that complicated narrative, but changing and pushing higher education and student affairs forward. And so to be able to reflect upon that, my ACPA presidential address took place in 2021 when we did the virtual convention. And I am a student of history by nature, and so I really started making, and we were working on the ACPA at 100 celebration group. And so I was doing a lot of history and thinking about, like, what is it that made these 9 women in really the middle of a pandemic, around a war, like what is it that brought this group together to then create our association? And I just think there's some very interesting parallels to where we are now. And so that notion is, as we turn 100 and we go into this next chapter of 100 years, what opportunities lie ahead? How are we going to shift and change? How are we going to lean into the changes that need to happen? And where I think there's just so much possibility in the work that we could be doing to be more aligned to who we want to be in our vision for the world. And so coming together to celebrate that, but to also like pull our sleeves up and think about, okay, and how are we going to make that happen now? And what is our path to the next 100 years is very exciting to me.